Lois, Tina. Hey, congratulations on this documentary. First, we bombed New Mexico.
Yeah, it's a long time coming. Thank you so much, Gig. We're so thrilled that the film is going to be at Palm Springs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, the 8th, 9th, and 10th. And we're just recently released, and we worked on it for so many years and won a lot of awards upon its release. Best documentary at Austin and Audience Choice in Santa Fe. And now we're thrilled to be in Palm Springs.
I know I was going to say, Palm Springs International Film Festival is one of the most prestigious film festivals in this country, in fact, and it starts off 2024 for you pretty well.
Yes, great way to start the year off.
And we're very much looking forward to being in Palm Springs. Gig. This is a history that's never told, actually, never been told before. Obviously, we've been aware of it. We've been living it for 78 years. Everybody's looked away from us for 78 years. And it's the timing of this is perfect because we're entering, the awards season. And Lois's film, First We Bombed New Mexico, is the absolute counter narrative to the Oppenheimer film. And I always say that, the Oppenheimer film, it portrays the Manhattan Project and the Trinity test as though it took place in a vacuum. It doesn't show a single person from New Mexico that would look like me any place in the film. And we're the ones that did all the hard work, the dirty work. We're the ones that built the roads, the bridges, the facilities, and cleaned them. And we're the women that were, bussed up to Los Alamos, and we cooked the meals, cleaned the houses, changed every baby diaper, and fed every bottle. And you don't see any of that. And so, this is the counter narrative to the Oppenheimer film that has grossed close to $1 billion internationally and will win all sorts of awards.
Yeah, I'll talk specific about the Oppenheimer film itself, but Lois, tell us what actually originated, what sparked you to make this film in the first place.
Well, I had a award-winning career for CBS 60 Minutes and the BBC. I lived in London and developed films all over the world, and many of them were noticed. So then I fell in love with New Mexico, decided to take a break because I love the rich multicultural situation of Latino, Native Americans, and Anglos, and the beauty and the remoteness of it. And so I was here for a few years, and I need to say that I feel deeply about social justice and using my craft to make a difference. So when I discovered, because it's just not known, that the world's first nuclear bomb was detonated as close as 12 miles from longtime New Mexico residents, and it's left behind a legacy of suffering and multi-generational cancers. And none of this has been acknowledged by the US government, and these people have been ignored. These are my people. I live in New Mexico. I just was so determined that this was more important than any film I've ever made before. And I committed. And Tina, why don't you pick up there?
Well, it was a great evening. I remember the evening I met Lois. And actually, I was telling this history to a group of actors who were in New Mexico filming a series at the time that focused on the Manhattan Project. And I was speaking to these actors, and Lois was listening, and I saw the change in her expression, and it went from an expression of that she couldn't imagine what she was hearing to just pure horror as I told the stories of how we've suffered multi-generational cancers. And I knew from that moment that Lois was going to tell this story. She came on board immediately to tell this story.
Tina, I will have to throw this out to you because I'm gonna assume that it didn't take much convincing for you to participate in this documentary, but isn't it hard to relive and retell these stories over and over again for yourself?
Gig, I will tell you, that I have been interviewed so many times I've lost track. I said recently to somebody that since July, when Oppenheimer premiered, I've probably been interviewed 55 times by journalists, for podcasts, you name it. And there are days when it's exceedingly difficult to tell our histories over and over, to relive watching my father die, to relive knowing that my young niece, who's a student in college in California, is now the 5th generation in my family, to know that she's struggling with a cancer diagnosis, to live with wondering who's going to be next. Yes, those things are incredibly difficult. But, you know, I have said recently that the only thing that matches our sacrifice and our suffering is our determination for justice. And what that means for me is that I have to put aside the way that I feel some days. I have to put aside the heaviness. I have to put aside the difficulties associated with going over this and over this. And I have to look over the top of that and realize that this is the work that I was meant to do, and that I have to do what I have to do to bring attention to this long-standing injustice. And so there are many days when there's a definite heaviness associated with this. Yes.
Lois, as a director for this documentary, a lot of people have tried to tackle this this story, whether it's a documentary form or narrative form. How did you want to approach this differently to distinguish from the rest?
Well, I've been working on it. It's a good question, Gig. I've been working on this film for a very long time, 8 years. And when I started working on this film, nobody had tackled the program. Nobody was telling the story. At this point, and particularly since Oppenheimer came on the scene, people are telling the story, and people are saying, well, what happened after this horrendous bomb exploded? What was its impact? But my goal was, and challenge was, to firstly to follow Tina. I knew that she had the weight and the gravitas to lead us through this story, because how do you tell a coherent story when thousands of people have died? And so we saw it through Tina and these courageous women mothers who've gathered around her, New Mexican mothers who have nursed too many family members and children. And they want their voices heard, and they want to make a difference. So the priority was to have an intimate verite story of these women's struggle. What does it take to have justice when you are fighting the US government? But then that wasn't enough, because just to have people talk about their tragedies is not evidence and proof. So I needed to also show the facts, the statistics, the cover-ups, the secret documents, the archival footage, and bring in like extraordinary people who have experts and who've devoted their careers to this, and weave it all in organically so you don't get bogged down with anything. It just organically flows. And so that was really the challenge. And also to make New Mexico a character, because it's magnificent. The culture is unique. To show the music, the food, the joy of these communities who stick together despite horrendous tragedies and loss. And so that was how I wanted to tell the story.
That is true. And Tina, I know you brought up Oppenheimer several times. When the film actually came out, did you enjoy the movie, or did you felt hurt by the film when it was released?
I wept openly during the scenes about Trinity. I had a lot of anxiety with actually going to the theater to see the movie. I was invited to attend a screening in Santa Fe and serve on a panel discussion afterwards. And I didn't realize the level of anxiety I had that morning. I actually spent all morning in tears, and I'm a strong person. And I kept thinking, why am I so affected by this? I'm having anxiety, a lot of anxiety. And I didn't realize how it was going to affect me. I believed that watching it in a theater, the way it was going to be produced, would be the closest I would come. You have to remember that I don't know how many people, Gig, I've lost track of the number of people who've told me their firsthand accounts of that day. Most of them were Hispanos, Mexican Americans that were part of the communities I grew up in. And they told me things like, we dropped to our knees and we started praying the rosary in Spanish. My mom gathered us up in bed and said, if we're going to die, we'll all die together. And she made us pray the rosary. My mom told us we were going to see God coming out from behind the fireball that we saw rise in the sky. I mean, dramatic histories that people never forgot. And so I felt like it would be the closest I'd ever be to the actual test. And I openly wept through that part of the movie. I don't know that I enjoyed the movie. Like I said before, I thought it was an exploitation of our lands and our lives, much like the Manhattan Project. You know, the people of New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, is the only state that has always been a minority majority state, the only state. And I really do believe that's the reason that we were chosen in part for the Manhattan Project and the Trinity test, because the government said then and continues to say today that no one lived here and no one was harmed. And nothing could be further from the truth. We know there were 13,000 children, women, and men living in a 50-mile radius. They all looked like me. They were brown people, well, most of them. And so, you know, I feel as though the movie was nothing more than an invasion of our lands and our lives, an exploitation of our lands and our lives to produce this mega billion-dollar hit, with no reflection on the harm that was done to the people here who were just living their peaceful, very meager but full lives.
Lois, I'm going to throw the same question to you because I know you're coming from a different perspective. What was your reaction when you watched Oppenheimer?
Well, I enjoyed watching it because he's a great film director, and I observed and enjoyed seeing how he constructed scenes, how he shot scenes, but it didn't relate to our story. And I was able to say, well, he was basing it on a book, and that book was very limited. It had one focus, but it missed a huge elephant in the living room, which was, we heard from the scientists, we heard from the military, we all have heard from General Groves and Robert Oppenheimer, etc. We have never heard the third narrative. What do the people have to say about how the Trinity Bomb impacted and devastated and changed their lives and the lives of the next generations going forward?
And speaking of next generations, Tina, is there any I don't want to say hopelessness because this fateful event actually happened, but is there any hope for our future generations, particularly with yourself, your family, and you know, brown people down in New Mexico?
You know, the very sad thing about it is, Gig, that in New Mexico, we have what's called the cradle to grave processes taking place here. And long ago, we were chosen. It's essentially what some people refer to as a sacrifice zone. The cradle is the opening up of the earth. We have the uranium mining that has taken place here. New Mexico was the largest producer of uranium at one time. We have over 1,000 abandoned uranium mine and mill sites across the Navajo Nation, Laguna, and Acoma Pueblo. Those were sacred lands to the Native people. They came here and extracted 32 million tons of uranium. Imagine 32 million tons of uranium, and left these huge open pits and all of the, you know, the waste that's associated with that, and walked away. And then we have the Manhattan Project, and they dumped the waste from the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos well into the 1970s, they were dumping the waste in the canyons there that makes its way into the Rio Grande watershed, which actually is the water supply for everything south of Los Alamos, past El Paso to the Gulf of Mexico. And then we have the bomb at Trinity. And then we're the only place where there's a permanent repository for nuclear waste, low-level nuclear waste, but we're under consideration for high-level nuclear waste right now. And the truth is, you know, people have got to understand this history, because if we don't stand up, then there's a good chance that the mistakes of the past are going to be repeated. Our government is now entering into a nuclear arms race that is taking place pretty much in a very silent fashion. Most people don't realize it. We're ramping up pit production at Los Alamos. Russia is no longer part of the test ban treaty. Testing is going to start up again at Nevada. They're preparing for that. And so we will continue to perpetuate mistakes if we don't acknowledge those that have been made and come to the realization that there's no safe testing of nuclear devices. There's no safe testing anywhere. There's no safe use of nuclear devices, even limited nuclear devices. And we're the legacy of that. We're the living proof of that. And this is multi-generational. The bomb at Trinity was a plutonium-based bomb. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years. So we are saddled with this for the remainder of time. And that's just the hard truth of it. And so this film, our film, the documentary, is relevant in an enormous way today, simply because of the geopolitical, storms that we're facing currently.
Mhm. And what can people do about this, even if they know?
You know, people need to make sure that their members of Congress are made aware of the fact that this horrible injustice took place already, that people have never been taken care of. Our government is no longer challenging that they harmed us. They're simply saying, we don't want to put our resources towards taking care of you. Now, if that's not immoral, I don't know what is, because we live in a land of law and order. You and I, Gig, if we went out there and recklessly harmed people, and then when we were held to account for it, we simply said, we don't want to put our resources towards taking care of this, that would never fly. But that's what's happening with our government right now. And so people need to stand up and say, this is unjust, this is immoral, and this is not how our government should be spending my tax dollars. I don't want to see my tax dollars spent on expanding the Pentagon and funding for, all of that, when there are things that are absolutely necessities. One necessity being that we take care of the messes we've created. And secondly, that we focus on things that are much more important, like the health and well-being of all Americans, education, et cetera.
And also what you can do, Gig, thank you for having us on your program. I can make a film, Tina can tell her story, but if it's not seen or heard, it's not going to make a difference. So we also are really grateful to the Palm Springs Film Festival for screening our film this coming Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And what we need is for journalists to come and write about it so the people know what happened. This was covered up. This was the secret. And so they demand justice and join our impact campaign and put pressure on those remaining really Republican leaders who are fighting the majority of people Congress people who want this justice and they want this legislation expanded.
Terrific. Well, I've taken a lot of your time already, so I'm going to wrap it up with one last question, and hopefully it's a good one for yourself. As audiences have a chance to watch First We Bomb New Mexico, what is the one most important take you hope they walk away with?
For me, I would say that I want people to walk away with the understanding that American citizens were harmed in our country's quest for nuclear superiority, and everybody should stand up for justice for those people who were just innocent victims in that equation of nuclear superiority. We all have a role to play, and all of us can be advocates. And it's an absolute requirement. I always say, once you know this history, if you remain complacent, then you're complicit in how unjust it was. And I just want to invite everybody to come to Palm Springs who's interested, to see the screenings with us and share in the time and space, and have a chance to ask us questions afterwards during the panel discussions.
Lois, last words?
I want people to be moved, and everybody who sees this film, they are moved. And for them to know that they have to stand up for what is truthful and what happened, and that that's how we make our country better, by uncovering the tragedies and fighting to have a better quality of life and more respect for our earth and our fellow men and women.
Well said, well said. And that's why we need to make these type of real stories, not just the narrative stories. So, ladies, good luck in Palm Springs. But first, we bombed New Mexico. And Tina, I wish you well for yourself, your family, and generations to come.
Thank you, Gig. It's been a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much, Gig.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye now.